Hi, welcome to Lesson 2.e, all about if statements. Every programming language has if statements, including Java, and they're among the most important statements we learn about because they teach us how we can make our program do something different depending on our data. So let's take a look at an example. In previous videos, you learned about assignment statements, taking a value from the right-hand side of the equal sign, moving it into a variable that's on the left-hand side. So let's say we're writing a program for a bank. We want to find the balance of a particular account. We've got values in a variable called balance and check amount, and we say new balance equals whatever was in the balance minus the check amount. Well, that's all well and good if everything is working properly. But maybe we want to get a little bit more nuanced. Let's take a look at what might happen. Suppose it's possible for the check amount to be a negative number. Well, that doesn't make any sense to have a negative check. If I write a check for negative $25, does that mean you put $25 in my account? No, it's obviously an error, so we don't want to process that check. So I can do something like, if check amount is greater than or equal to 0, then do the same statement we had before. New balance equals balance minus the check amount. Else, if this condition was not true, if check amount was not greater than or equal to 0, meaning check amount is less than 0, do a different statement. New balance equals the balance. Don't change it at all. Well, that's pretty useful. Suppose we wanted to have more than one thing that we do. If the check amount is less than or equal to the balance, we make the new balance equal to the original balance minus the check amount, and maybe we print out a message saying everything's okay. Else, if the check amount wasn't less than or equal to the balance, we just set the new balance equal to the current balance and print out a message, hey, you don't have enough funds to cover this. So what is the syntax of an if statement? If a particular condition, which is enclosed in parentheses, is true, execute statement 1, otherwise execute statement 2. Let's break this down. The condition is any expression that evaluates to either true or false. That can be those comparisons like in our previous examples, which were check amount greater than or equal to 0. It could be Boolean variables, anything that can evaluate to a true or false. Statement 1 gets executed if that condition evaluated to true. So if the condition is true, we'll do statement 1. Statement 1 is either one statement ending with a semicolon, or it is a block of statements like in our previous example, a block of statements enclosed in braces. Statement 2, which comes after the word else, gets executed if the condition was false. And statement 2 can also either be a single statement ending with a semicolon or multiple statements that have to be enclosed in braces like we saw in our previous example. The entire else clause is optional. We could just say if condition statement 1 and not have an else. But if we want an else, we can put it in. Now notice there is no semicolon after the condition, and there's no semicolon after the word else. The syntax of this is if condition statement 1 semicolon, else statement 2 semicolon. That's awfully important. And we'll see some examples of what can happen if you get that wrong a little bit later on in this video. Now, I can have multiple if statements. Suppose I wanted to, check to see if the check amount was less than or equal to 0. And if it is, I'm just going to set the new balance equal to balance. But maybe I'm also checking, do I have enough money in my account? Is the check amount less than or equal to the current balance? Because if I have $50 in my account, I can't write a check for $100. So I want to do this if statement. If check amount is less than or equal to the balance, then set the new balance equal to balance minus the check amount. Well, these two statements will execute perfectly fine in Java. There is no syntax problem with these statements. But do they do what we really want? Suppose that, my balance is $100, the check amount is $50. Let's walk through this and see what happens. If the check amount is less than or equal to 0, well, it's not because it's $50, so I won't do the statement that says new balance equals balance. Then I'll see, is the check amount less than or equal to balance? Since it is, check amount was 50, balance is 100, I'm going to then say my new balance is that $100 minus the 50. Perfect. But what if the check amount was negative $25? Now we go, if the check amount is less than or equal to 0, set the new balance equal to the balance. That's exactly what we want. But look at the next if statement. If the check amount is less than or equal to balance, which it will be because negative 25 is less than 100, then we're going to do new balance equals balance minus the checking amount. We'll be adding $25 to this person's account. Clearly not what we want to do. The problem is, if I did the first one, I don't want to even check the second condition. Well, I can take care of this by, instead of just having two if statements in a row, I'll nest them. I'm going to do it this way. If the check amount is less than or equal to 0, I'll set new balance equal to balance. Else, meaning only if the check amount was not less than or equal to 0, I'll do another test. If check amount less than or equal to balance, set the new balance equal to the balance minus the check amount. $100 minus $50. And if that wasn't true, that means neither of the first two conditions were true. Then I print out the message, error. So we've nested the if statements. I can nest any number of if statements I want. I can have if, else if something else, else if something else, else if something else, else if something else. Finally, just an else that happens no matter what. So now let's look at what I've done. If the check amount is less than 0, move the balance into new balance. But if it isn't less than 0, then we'll do the next part. If it exactly equals 0, print out a message. What? A check for $50? Or excuse me, a check for $0? And then ignore it by making the new balance equal to the balance. But if neither of those were true, then we do the next test. If the check amount is less than or equal to the balance, subtract the check amount. And finally, this last else, we only do if all three of the previous tests were failed. And we'll just print out error. Notice for each one of these, I can either have a single statement or multiple statements within braces. I can pick and choose however I want. Now, remember we talked about semicolons before. This is what can happen if you forget that you don't want a semicolon at the end of the word if parenthesis condition parenthesis. If I write this, Eclipse isn't going to complain. Java is going to execute this just fine. But what's going to happen? If the check amount is less than or equal to balance, Java will look to see if the check amount is less than or equal to the balance, and then it will execute the very next statement. The very next statement consists of nothing followed by a semicolon. So it did this check for no reason. If the check amount is less than or equal to balance, do nothing. Then the if statement is done, and it's always going to do new balance equals balance minus check amount. I've indented it so that it looks to me, the human, like this statement only happens if check amount is less than or equal to balance. But Java doesn't look at what you did for indenting. It said, you said if something's true, do nothing. And then you said, do something else. So remember, don't put a semicolon at the end of the parenthesis for the condition. Also, don't put a semicolon at the end of the word else, just like with the if that says, else do nothing at all. Do the statement that consists of nothing, followed by a semicolon. It's a common mistake, especially for beginning programmers, so be on the lookout for it.